She should have eaten somewhere else. Places like this aren't made for wheels. One of them laughed. The words cut through the diner, sharp and cruel. 3 bikers in leather vests stood near the door, grinning like they owned the place. One stepped forward and tipped her wheelchair just enough to send her rolling into a booth. Silverware crashed. Coffee splashed. She didn't scream, didn't beg, just braced herself against the floor. No one helped. Not the waitress, not the manager, not the other customers, but a boy saw. So did his father. A quiet man in a weathered camo cap. 30 minutes later, a military green SUV pulled up outside. 3 Marines stepped in. And just like that, the diner fell silent. The town of Hickory Falls wasn't known for much, just a quiet main street, a few churches, 1 blinking traffic light, and a diner that hadn't changed in 40 years. The locals called it Grr's, though the peeling letters on the sign up front were missing the GNR. Still, folks came in for the coffee too bitter to enjoy, too familiar to replace, and the eggs that always arrive 5 minutes late, but somehow always hot. At the far left corner of the diner, under a crooked clock that always ran 8 minutes slow, sat Margaret Maggie Sloan. She had made that booth her own unofficially for the past 3 years. Maggie was 52, a retired Marine gunnery sergeant. She'd served 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan, and left her last posting with a chest full of commendations and 1 fewer leg than she arrived with. A roadside IED outside of Fallujah had taken her left leg, and in some quiet way, her trust in the world. She rolled into the diner every weekday at 10:45 a.m. in her black manual wheelchair. The right wheel squeaked if she leaned into it too hard, and the left brake never fully locked unless she gave it a firm jerk. The prosthetic leg she was issued remained tucked away in the corner of her 1-bedroom apartment upstairs from Miller's Hardware. She didn't wear it much anymore. The chair was easier, honest. She never asked for special treatment, never complained when customers stared or when the fryer gave her grease burns. She folded silverware into napkins with a focus most people mistook for detachment. But the few who really paid attention saw something else. A kind of quiet precision. The kind of person who doesn't forget after years of assembling weapons under fire. Most folks in town knew who she was. They'd nod when she rolled past, sometimes offer a brief thank you for your service. But that was where the recognition stopped. She was known but not seen. Not really. Just a piece of the scenery like the old jukebox that never worked or the ceiling fan that clicked with every rotation. That morning had been like any other. She had finished her 2nd cup of coffee and was halfway through rolling the silverware for the lunch shift when the door slammed open. It wasn't just the volume, it was the intention. Loud, violent, disrespectful. 3 men strutted in, all clad in black leather vests adorned with patches and profanity. Red, Bones, and Slug. Nobody knew their real names, but everyone knew they came from 2 towns over and liked to make trouble. They weren't part of a real biker gang, just men with too much time and not enough self-respect. Red led the way, broad-chested with a shaved head and a long scar that ran down his jawline. Bones was wiry and jittery, chewing toothpicks like they owed him money. Slug trailed behind, slow-moving and greasy, as though even his shadow was reluctant to follow him. They took a booth near the front and started off loud, slapping the table, making crude jokes, eyeing the waitress like she owed them more than a menu. The mood in the diner shifted. People stopped talking. The air grew heavy with hesitation. Maggie didn't look up. She kept folding napkins. Red spotted her first. "Well, damn," he sneered, elbowing Bones. "Looks like we've got a visitor from the VA." Bones snickered. "Or the junkyard. Who let the scrap metal in?" Maggie said nothing. Slug chimed in. "Maybe she's part of the entertainment. Bet she folds napkins better than she marched." The waitress froze mid-pour. Customers stared down at their plates. No one said a word. At a corner booth, a young boy named Eli sat wide-eyed, clutching a crayon in one hand and a paper placemat in the other. Across from him, his father Tom, lean and quiet in a faded camo jacket, watched everything with a stillness born from years of knowing when to speak and when to wait. Red stood up. He walked toward Maggie, making a show of his boots thumping across the tile. He stopped behind her chair. "Hey, soldier girl," he said loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Think you could roll us some coffee? Or do you need permission from your CO first?" Maggie turned just slightly, her eyes cool and flat. "Cream or black?" she asked. That made Bones laugh. Red didn't. "You got some nerve," he muttered. "People like you are why the country's soft." Maggie didn't flinch. She rolled toward the coffee station, filled 3 mugs, placed them on a tray, and brought them to the table. She set them down without a word. That's when Slug made his move. It happened in an instant, so fast it didn't register until it was already too late. As Maggie turned to leave, Slug stepped behind her and grabbed the handles of her chair. "Nice push," he sneered and shoved. "Not hard enough to injure, just hard enough to humiliate." The wheelchair jerked forward and clipped the corner of a booth. Maggie lost control. Her tray went flying. 1 cup shattered against the floor. Hot coffee splashed across her arm and then she was down flat on the cold tile. The diner went dead silent. No one moved. Not the waitress. Not the manager. Not a single soul except Eli. He dropped his crayon. "Dad," he whispered. "Is that lady a soldier?" Tom stood slowly, his eyes fixed on Maggie. She wasn't crying. She wasn't shaking. She pushed herself up with practiced effort the same way she had 1,000 times before. Her jaw was tight, her breathing steady. Her coat had slipped open when she fell. A worn leather wallet had tumbled from the inner pocket. A photo slid across the floor. It landed face up. 7 Marines in desert gear standing shoulder to shoulder in the blinding sun, all grinning, all young. Maggie stood in the center. On the back, in faded marker, someone had written, "She carried us all." Tom's expression didn't change. He stepped outside and pulled out his phone. Inside, Maggie picked up the photo, wiped the coffee from its edges, and slid it back into her wallet. Then, she returned to her corner booth and resumed folding napkins. Because that's what Marines do. Even when no one stands for them, they remain standing on the inside. Outside the diner, the Idaho sun had begun its slow descent behind the ridge, painting the sky in soft gold and amber streaks. The gravel lot crackled beneath Tom's boots as he walked with quiet purpose toward his old Chevy pickup. He didn't slam the door. He didn't look back at the diner. He simply leaned against the hood, pulled out his phone, and scrolled to a number he hadn't used in years. Tom Parker wasn't a man of noise. He didn't believe in making scenes or speeches. Desert Storm had taught him that real decisions, the ones that mattered, were made quietly, without fanfare, without warning. He glanced through the diner's window from a distance. Inside, Maggie Sloan was back in her corner, her head slightly bowed, hands moving with rigid mechanical grace as she folded another napkin around a fork and knife. She didn't look up. She didn't show pain, but something in her shoulders spoke volumes, a kind of heaviness you don't get from physical injury alone. Tom exhaled slowly, brought the phone to his ear, and waited. It rang only once. A voice answered. Sergeant Daniels. Tom didn't waste time. It's Parker. Hickory Falls. I'm calling about one of ours. A pause. Named Gunnery Sergeant Margaret Sloan. The voice on the other end went still. Then, I know her. What happened? Tom's jaw clenched. Public harassment. Civilian side. Biker punks tipped her chair. Laughed. No one stepped in. No one did a damn thing. Another pause. Not hesitation, calculation. Is she all right? She picked herself up. She always does. But that's not the point, is it? No answer. Tom added, his voice lower now, almost gravel. I brought my son here. He watched it happen. I'll be damned if his first memory of a Marine is that. The line went quiet for a breath. Then the voice replied, firm but calm. You wanted official? No. Off the books, civilian ground. But make it count. Understood. Tom hung up without saying goodbye. He slid the phone back into his coat pocket, stared off toward the mountains for a long moment, then walked back inside like nothing had happened. Inside, the scene hadn't changed. Red had kicked his boots up on the edge of the table, one hand spinning a butter knife like it was a toy. Bones laughed at something Crude Slug whispered under his breath. Their drinks had been refilled. The waitress didn't make eye contact. The manager stayed in the back. The regulars went about their business with that quiet discomfort unique to small towns when everyone sees but no one speaks. Maggie continued her task. Roll, fold, place. Her fingers worked in rhythm. Napkins, silverware, napkins again. There was coffee on her sleeve and a bruise forming on her hip, but she didn't complain. The pain was familiar. What stung worse was the silence, the way the room had watched and done nothing. She'd survived war zones where mortars fell without warning, where sand turned red before it cooled. And yet, something about this, being tipped like furniture in a greasy spoon diner, felt colder than combat ever had because it had been permitted, because no one had cared. Or so she thought. In the corner booth, Eli sat perfectly still, his little hands cupped around his glass of lemonade. But he didn't drink it. His eyes were fixed on Maggie, his expression confused, almost guilty. He didn't understand what exactly had happened, but he knew enough to feel wrong about it. Across from him, Tom watched the bikers with an even stare. He hadn't made a scene. He hadn't yelled, but something in the air felt different. Not immediately, but subtly, like a quiet hum before a distant storm. Red barked a laugh that echoed louder than it should have. Place needs better help, he scoffed, tossing a sugar packet onto the table, or a mop. Maggie didn't respond. She just stacked another napkin bundle and slid it into the bin with a soft clink. And the clock on the wall kept ticking. The clink of glasses and the low hum of conversation had returned to Granger's diner. But it all felt thinner now, like fabric stretched too tight over a cracked frame. The laughter from the corner booth where the bikers lounged had grown louder, more self-assured, performative even. Red leaned back, one boot perched arrogantly on the table. Slug was flicking sugar packets at a ketchup bottle, and Bones was halfway through a story that involved a bar fight, 3 cops, and a duct-taped raccoon. No one laughed with them, but no one stopped them either. The waitress avoided their booth completely now, finding every excuse to be behind the counter, endlessly polishing a coffee pot that had been clean for 15 minutes. The manager, Dave, hadn't come out from the kitchen since the incident, and Maggie hadn't spoken a word. She sat in her usual corner, her sleeves still damp from spilled coffee, her uniform shirt now bearing a faint spreading stain over her left side. Her posture remained upright, her hands steady as she folded napkins with the kind of mechanical grace only muscle memory could produce. But she wasn't folding for customers anymore. She was bracing against the room, against the weight of being seen, then dismissed, against the ache that wasn't in her leg, but in something deeper, something older. Outside, the afternoon light had changed. The shadows in the gravel lot stretched long and thin. A breeze moved through the trees beyond the diner, carrying with it the dry rustle of dust and pine needles. And then, faint at first, came the sound. Tires on gravel, not the whine of a sedan or the low grumble of a pickup truck. No, this sound was deeper, controlled. Military tires crunching with precision like they knew where to stop before they even arrived. The laughter inside the diner faltered. Maggie didn't turn to the window, but her hand paused over the next napkin. The green SUV pulled into view slowly, kicking up a soft curl of dust behind it. It was spotless. Not flashy, utilitarian, matte military green, no sirens, no decals, just a small, unmistakable emblem on the door of the Eagle, Globe, and Anchor of the United States Marine Corps. It came to a stop directly in front of the diner. The engine didn't cut. The door opened. And then 3 figures emerged. The first was a man in his 60s, tall and broad, with a silver crew cut and a limp barely hidden by the gleaming black cane in his right hand. His uniform was crisp, every crease sharp, his master's sergeant insignia shining like it had been polished in the parking lot. Behind him came a younger Marine, late 20s, high and tight haircut, clean-shaven, and chest squared, pushing an empty wheelchair with quiet reverence. His boots struck the gravel like a heartbeat. Last was a woman, her dark hair pulled into a perfect regulation bun beneath her officer's cap. Her captain's bars caught the light as she moved with a kind of calm, unshakable authority. Her ribbon rack was extensive, yet not a single medal was out of place. The 3 didn't speak. They didn't need to. The door to the diner swung open, not slammed, but pushed with precision. A breeze followed them in. The kind that doesn't just carry cold air, but tension. The bikers went silent. Bones set down his spoon. Slug froze with a sugar packet halfway to his mouth. Red's smirk faltered just slightly as the Marines entered in a straight line, boots scuffing the worn tile like thunder. The master sergeant's eyes swept the room once, like scanning a battlefield. Then he walked straight toward Maggie. She hadn't moved. She watched him come without flinching. He stopped exactly 2 feet from her table, stood at full height despite his limp, and delivered a textbook salute. It was crisp, respectful, final. "Gunnery Sergeant Sloan," he said, his voice a deep growl that carried through the diner. "Forgive our delay." Maggie didn't blink. Her hand came up automatically. The salute returned sharp and precise. For the first time all day, her jaw loosened just slightly. Her eyes, those hard desert-weathered eyes, brightened. Not with tears, but with something else. Recognition, dignity, the quiet kind of pride that lives beneath scars. The captain stepped forward next. Her voice was calm, measured. "We received a call," she said, her gaze never leaving Maggie's. "One of ours said a Marine had been publicly harassed on civilian ground." She turned then, slowly, deliberately, and her gaze landed directly on Red's table. The air in the room shifted. Red cleared his throat. Bones looked down. Slug shrank in his seat. The captain continued, and that physical contact was involved. Maggie, ever composed, shook her head slightly. "It's nothing," she murmured almost reflexively. But the master sergeant didn't look away. "With respect, Gunnery Sergeant," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "It is not nothing. Nobody touches one of ours. Not in combat. Not in peace. Not ever." The younger Marine finally spoke, stepping forward. His voice was quieter, but there was weight behind it. "Ma'am, Gunnery Sergeant Sloan pulled me out of a burning Humvee in Fallujah. I wouldn't be standing here if she hadn't." Maggie blinked. Her voice came low, disbelieving. "Private Jenkins," he nodded. "Corporal now, ma'am, thanks to you." Around the diner, the room changed again, not with sound, but with posture. Tom stood from his booth, gently guiding Eli up with him. Across the room, an elderly man wearing a Korean war cap stood as well. Then, a pair of men in civilian clothes, National Guard based on their stance, rose slowly. Within seconds, half the diner was on its feet, not shouting, not clapping, just standing, shoulders back, heads high. A silent wall of respect. The bikers didn't say a word. For the first time since they swaggered through the door, the room no longer belonged to them. It belonged to Maggie, and she hadn't raised her voice, hadn't lifted a hand. She had simply remained, and the Corps had come. A week had passed since the day the Marines walked through Granger's diner and changed the room without lifting a single weapon or raising a single voice. But something deeper had shifted since then, something you couldn't measure with time or temperature. The diner itself seemed different now. The clock above the kitchen still ran 8 minutes slow. The booth still creaked, but the silence had changed. It no longer weighed heavy with discomfort. It breathed with quiet respect. And the name above the front door had changed, too. The old rusted metal sign that once read Granger's Diner had been taken down 2 days after the incident. In its place, a hand-carved wooden board now stood tall above the entrance, freshly painted in deep navy blue and gold script. Valor Cafe, where honor is always on the menu. No press release, no grand opening, just quiet hands working in the early morning fog, repainting the front steps and sanding the old windowsills. No one talked about it, but everyone noticed. Inside, the decor had shifted, too. The back wall, once blank and faded, now held a framed photo display titled "Those Who Served." Veterans from the town, both past and present, had begun bringing in pictures of themselves and others. Young men in desert fatigues, old black and white portraits from Korea and Vietnam. Even a few smiling snapshots of women in crisp navy whites or army greens. At the center of that display was a new photo of Maggie Sloan, arms crossed, standing in front of the diner with the 3 Marines who'd walked in that day. She wasn't smiling in the photo, but her eyes told another story, a deeper one. And taped to the back of her wheelchair now was a small frayed American flag patch, faded at the corners, but proudly visible. She still sat in the same corner booth every afternoon, still folded napkins with military precision, but she didn't fade into the background anymore. People greeted her by name now. Some offered thanks, others just nodded, but they looked her in the eye when they did. The silence she once worked inside had been replaced with acknowledgement and maybe something like peace. Tom and Eli came in every Friday. Eli now carried a notebook with questions about the military. He was collecting stories, he said. Maggie gave him short answers at first, but eventually she began telling him things no one else in town had ever heard. Not about war exactly, but about loyalty and loss and what it meant to carry someone through fire. The waitress Melissa had changed, too. She'd been the one who froze behind the counter that day, too afraid to move when Maggie hit the floor. Since then, she'd taken it upon herself to learn every rank in the Marine Corps hierarchy. She asked Maggie questions during her breaks. She started recognizing the difference between stripes and bars. She'd even begun pinning small flags on her apron during shifts. Dave, the manager, had shaved his beard and started wearing a tie. He didn't talk about what happened, but his actions said enough. He'd hired 2 new part-time employees that week, both veterans. One worked the grill, the other cleaned during closing hours. Both were quiet, respectful, and dependable. Maggie trained them herself. No ceremony, no speeches, just quiet correction when the line wasn't straight or the folding wasn't crisp enough. And every Thursday at precisely 1800 hours, the same military SUV pulled into the lot. Sergeant Collins, Captain Reyes, and Corporal Jenkins stepped out without a word and entered the diner. They didn't stand. They didn't draw attention. They simply sat with Maggie, drank coffee, and sometimes shared stories that made the room fall silent again. Not from fear, but from reverence. They never announced themselves, but everyone knew. Even those who didn't understand military culture could feel it. That weight of shared history, of sacrifice honored without applause. And perhaps most telling of all, the table where Red, Bones, and Slug had sat that day now remained empty. No one had banned them. No sign hung above it, but people just didn't sit there anymore. It was like the space itself had absorbed what happened and remembered. People avoid bad memories, even when the chairs are clean. The diner door jingled gently, the kind of sound you'd expect on a lazy Sunday morning in a small town. But this evening, the sound carried a little more weight. The golden sun was beginning to dip behind the hills of Hickory Falls, casting long shadows across the windows of Valor Cafe. Margaret Maggie Sloan looked up from her corner booth, where she sat polishing a salt shaker that didn't need polishing. The window beside her framed a familiar view: gravel lot, dusty pickup trucks, the fading outline of a flag painted on the side of the fire station across the road. But it wasn't the view that caught her eye. It was the young man standing awkwardly in the doorway. He couldn't have been older than 18. His army dress uniform was crisp, but hung slightly loose on his narrow frame. He held his cap tightly in both hands like it might fly away if he dared to loosen his grip. His boots were clean. Too clean. The way only a brand new recruit's boots ever looked. Maggie recognized the stance instantly, nervous, but trying not to show it. Shoulders back, chin up, but knees locked and unsure where to go next. He scanned the diner, eyes landing on Maggie. And for a split second, he looked like he might turn around and walk back out. She didn't let him. Instead, she gave him the smallest of nods. Not a wave, not a smile. Just the kind of look someone gives when they've been where you are. When they remember. He stepped inside. "First deployment?" she asked, her voice calm and even. He nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am. Shipping out tomorrow morning." Maggie gestured to the empty seat across from her booth. "Sit down. Coffee's decent. Company's better." The young man hesitated. "I wouldn't want to intrude," he said softly. "You're not," she replied, motioning again. "You're continuing a tradition." He slid into the booth, still holding his cap. Maggie poured him a cup of coffee without asking if he wanted one. At the counter, Corporal Jenkins lifted his mug in a silent salute. Across the room, Captain Reyes and Master Sergeant Collins followed suit, each raising their cups, not with pomp, but with quiet purpose. The young recruit looked around, realizing slowly that everyone in the room had turned their attention to him. Not to stare, not to intimidate, but to acknowledge. "You're one of us now. You're seen. You're not alone." He blinked a little, overwhelmed, and Maggie reached across the table, resting a hand gently near his. "Whatever happens next," she said, "remember this place. Remember who you are before the noise starts. That's the part of you that'll get you home." He nodded. "Yes, ma'am." In the weeks that followed, Valor Cafe became more than just a diner. It became a waypoint, a place where stories were handed down without needing to be told in full. Maggie was invited to speak at the local high school. She didn't talk about battles or medals. Instead, she spoke about duty, about what it meant to carry others when they couldn't walk. She talked about silence, not the kind that shames, but the kind that strengthens. Business owners in Hickory Falls started placing signs in their windows. "Veterans served here always." A small black granite memorial was installed in the town square. Nothing extravagant, just a single inscription in silver letters. "To those who served with dignity and to those who stood with them." Veterans who had once kept quiet began to wear their hats again, their pins, their medals. One older man who hadn't stepped foot in the diner in years now came every Sunday with his Bronze Star pinned to his flannel shirt. And Maggie, she never left her post at the corner booth. But now she was never alone. A young woman barely out of basic training started coming in every Sunday morning. She asked questions, some nervous, some eager, about boot camp, about leadership, about fear. Maggie answered with the kind of honesty you can only give when you've already paid the price. And always, outside in the gravel lot, that green SUV waited. Rain or shine, same spot, same engine hum. Taped inside the window was a handwritten note that hadn't changed since the first day it appeared. We always come back for those who never quit. And in that quiet diner, tucked into a small Idaho town surrounded by coffee, respect, and memory, Maggie Sloan finally belonged. Not just as a veteran, not just as a survivor, but as the quiet heart of a community that had rediscovered its spine. Some stories stay with us, not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. Maggie Sloan didn't demand respect. She didn't chase recognition. And yet, through her silence, she reminded a whole town and maybe all of us that dignity doesn't need a microphone. It just needs to be seen. In today's world, we move fast. We scroll past struggle. We assume the strongest don't need checking on. But maybe this story reminds us to pause, to notice the quiet heroes sitting right next to us. The veteran down the street, the elderly woman at the grocery store, the man with a limp holding the door for someone who won't say thank you. Respect isn't owed because someone wears a uniform. It's owed because they carried burdens we'll never fully understand. So, let me ask you, have you ever witnessed someone stay strong in silence? Have you seen someone stand up when others looked away? Or maybe you were that person and no one saw it. Let's talk about it in the comments. Share your stories. Share who you're thinking of right now. Because stories like Maggie's aren't just about the past. They're a mirror to how we treat each other today. If this story moved you, consider subscribing for more like it. Hit the like button to help this reach someone who needs to hear it. And to every veteran, caregiver, and quiet soul out there, you are not invisible here. We see you. We thank you. And we will stand with you. Final note by Courageous Voices. Thank you for joining us on this journey of resilience and honor.